Welcome back as we continue to talk some MLB here. Over the weekend, we had the full rosters announced for the MLB All-Star Game, which is taking place in a couple weeks here. So we're going to dive into the full rosters and talk about, whether or not they got this right. So just a little quick recap here of the starters for the American League. We saw Adley Rutschman, Vlad Guerrero Jr., Jose Altuve, Gunnar Henderson, Jose Ramirez, Aaron Judge, Juan Soto, Steven Kwan, and Yordan Alvarez selected. Pretty straightforward there. The reserves, though, get a little bit interesting. Salvador Perez, Josh Naylor, Marcus Semien, Bobby Witt Jr., Carlos Correa, Rafael Devers, Kyle Tucker, Isaac Paredes, Jarren Duran, Riley Green, and David Fry. First takeaway from this group here of the reserves in the American League is how about the Guardians and seeing how far they have come this season to be a team that, was expected to maybe in the hunt in what was at least perceived headed into the season as a weak AL Central. And they have been phenomenal up to this point, 56-32. And not just that, but to see all of these all-star representatives on the offensive side of the ball, where that was not at all what was expected heading into the year. Jose Ramirez, who I think picked up his third career selection to the all-star game, which very much, deserved. I still think that there could have been a case for Rafael Devers starting over him. And even you could maybe throw in Jordan Westburg. I'm a little less high on that, but, I digress there. To see this collection of Guardians batters all in, the conversation, all three of them other than Jose Ramirez being first-timers is a massive deal, and you got to feel good for the Guardians here being able to, rack up this type of talent. And David Fry, I didn't think that he was going to, I didn't know if he was going to be able to even find positionally a way into this game, but ends up coming in as the backup DH, and he has been, incredible for the Guardians up to this point. So, again, feeling good for the guards here. But the other takeaway I had, no Orioles in terms of reserves. I just mentioned Jordan Westburg. He and a number of other players were finalists during the first phase of voting and, had 6 finalists, but are coming away with just 2 position players in the All-Star game. Mountcastle, Westburg, Santander, and O'Hearn, all of them were in the conversation in terms of the fan vote, but the MLB chose not to select either of them, any of them, I should say, into the reserves, which is a little bit disappointing, I'm sure. Again, I think that Santander and Westburg were probably the ones who maybe deserved a little bit more credit or consideration for this. But, Orioles are in a good place. They have Adley Rutschman and Gunnar Henderson as starters in this game, and 2 of the bright spots for not just the Orioles but the MLB as a whole moving forward, so can't feel too bad. Also did get a little bit of pitching representation with Corbin Burns. So on that note, moving into the pitchers here, you have Burns, Tyler Anderson, Garrett Crochet, Logan Gilbert, Tanner Houck, Seth Lugo, Tarek Skubal, Cole Reagans, Mason Miller, Kirby Yates, Clay Holmes, and Emmanuel Clase. I mean, this is a stacked group of pitchers in the American League, and have to feel good about that. My one gripe is Clay Holmes being in the selection here, and, it doesn't help that he just blew a save over the past weekend on Friday, but I do think that there were a number of better reliever options than Holmes. You can make an argument for Kenley Jansen of the Red Sox, Craig Kimbrell of the Orioles, Andres Munoz of the Mariners as well, are all probably better options. But again, I'm not going to cry about one selection there. A couple arms here, though, in this group of players that you could end up seeing get moved at the trade deadline. Last year, we saw Michael Lorenzen get moved shortly after his All-Star selection. And there are a couple names that have been thrown out in rumors. Tyler Anderson is the lone representative of the Los Angeles Angels. They are, quite frankly, clearly not going anywhere this season, currently sitting at 37-52. What's new? Sorry, Angels fans. But, you know, a name that he's, I believe at this point, 30 years old. And, you know, probably not going to be a part of the nucleus if the Angels, you know, whenever 34 years old for Tyler Anderson. So even older than I had initially thought. And not going to be a part of the nucleus for the Angels long term for whenever they do become competitive again. So they're definitely going to be taking calls on him. And then the White Sox have had sort of no problem demonstrating a little bit the availability of Garrett Crochet, who is a very enticing player, I feel like, for a lot of these teams. Now, it's going to be interesting, again, in where it feels like just about, you know, 2/3 of the team in the MLB are feeling good about their wild card chances, or at least, you know, making the playoffs. That Crochet at 25 years old, and feel like you can have a little bit more roster control with him, is probably on the higher end of the price. Now, you know, the White Sox are also terrible at 26-66, the worst run differential and record in the MLB, and by a significant margin at that, I'll add. And I can't imagine they're going to be too stingy. There's also probably, you know, a chance if they don't feel like there are good enough offers on the table that they could probably play this out a little bit longer with him. But Crochet would be somebody that I am definitely keeping an eye on in terms of, you know, availability in the trade market. Now, going over to the National League here, starters, again, just quickly run through them. William Contreras, Bryce Harper, Ketel Marte, Trey Turner, Alec Boehm, Jurickson Profar, Fernando Tatis, Christian Yelich, and Shohei Ohtani. But got the slew of reserves there, and a lot of Dodgers here was my thought. Will Smith, who has been on an absolute heater lately, but Freddie Freeman as well. Then you have Luis Arias, Pete Alonso, C.J. Abrams, Ellie De La Cruz, Ryan McMahon, Teoscar Hernandez, Mookie Betts, Jackson Merrill, Elliot Ramos, Brian Reynolds, and Marcell Ozuna. So, like I mentioned, Dodgers representation here, big time. Talk about Freeman, Smith, Hernandez, and Betts. Betts should have been selected as the starter, I think, pretty clearly. Just, you know, Trae Young is having a very impactful season from when he's playing, but it's a big, you know, where he's just missed so many games that I think Mookie should have been the starter from the jump there. But, you know, Dodgers, the best team in the MLB, at least in my eyes. People may argue the Phillies as well, which is very fair, and they have their share of representation as well. So, you know, top two teams deserve to have their guys out there. In my opinion here, and I know that, you know, popularity and everything plays a big factor into this, especially when we're talking about the MLB trying to generate some national excitement. There is quite literally a polar bear roaming the streets in Arlington, Texas. This game taking place in Arlington, Texas, and Pete Alonso was chosen as the lone representative of the New York Mets, and I just think that there were multiple better options from the Mets themselves in both Francisco Lindor and Brandon Nimmo. I heard, you know, some other arguments as well in terms of, you know, Severino as from a pitcher standpoint, making it over Pete Alonso. I kind of feel like it's about to, for the MLB, it's about generating a little bit of extra excitement because Alonso said that as long as he is in the All-Star game, he is going to do the home run derby. That's kind of his thing. He's the derby guy, and he's a good player, and he hits a lot of home runs, and he has this season as well. So he's not bad by any means, but I don't know, especially with Lindor not making it. Now, there's a chance that things could open up for him, that he makes it as a reserve, because Mookie Betts, who was just announced as a reserve. He is probably not going to play, I would have to imagine, in this, which, Lindor, I think he was buried because, in large part, there were a lot of different shortstops at play there with De La Cruz and Abrams, and that's, Trey Turner obviously being the starter, and just all of these players kind of taking up middle infield spots. I think that almost hurt Lindor, but there is maybe still a chance he could end up playing as an injury replacement, but we'll see there. And then the pitchers for the National League: Ranger Suarez, Tyler Glasnow, Shota Imanaga, Reynaldo Lopez, Logan Webb, Paul Skeens, Chris Sale, Zach Wheeler, Ryan Helsley, Tanner Scott, Robert Suarez, Matt Strom, and Jeff Hoffman. Obviously, out of that group, Paul Skeens is the name that pops out there. Having him and Ellie De La Cruz both on the same team, it is going to be something that gets people excited, and we'll see whether or not they actually make it in it. I think that there's kind of no doubt that Skeens should have made it. You can make the argument that because he hasn't played as many games as other players, he didn't. He's one of the most exciting players in baseball, and as at least if we're talking about current pitchers that are healthy, I think that he is top 10 in the league. And that's probably a little bit more on the conservative side as well, in terms of, planting your flag in Skeens Island here, that there are people who probably have him top 5, top 3, but I think even being safe, top 10 in the league, not even just National League, but in the entire MLB, currently healthy, Skeens is absolutely up there. And then my other thought was Shota Imanaga being here. I mean, it's interesting, the Cubs need somebody to play for them. Imanaga has had a 5.45 ERA since June 1st. Now, the first, portion of this season was incredible for him, but he's been getting hit really hard as of late. Ultimately, it was enough in the first half of the season that he was able to, establish this spot for himself. And again, the Cubs needed somebody, but this was an interesting one to me. But let me know whether or not you think we got it right or wrong. Maybe we dive into some snubs later this week, but there were a lot of names we just had to run through. So we are going to be taking our next break here, and when we come back on the other side, we're going to be diving into a little bit more basketball, actually, starting in the NBA, where the Sacramento Kings just acquired DeMar DeRozan in a sign and trade from the Chicago Bulls, and now the multiple-time All-Star is headed to Sacramento to try and help them establish themselves in terms of where the hierarchy of the Western Conference is, whether or not that is going to help them overcome not making the playoffs last year. So we are going to be diving into that. Stick with us. We will be right back after this quick break.